Hello and welcome back to session 4 of NACAA 2022. My name is Stuart Beveridge and I am the NACAA 2022 convener and chairperson for the day. Our next presentation is by Dr. Russell Cockman. Russell is the ASV's current solar section director. Russell is a retired industrial chemist who continues to share his passion for science by lecturing chemistry at RMIT University, Melbourne, and as observatory guide at Melbourne Observatory. He is going to demonstrate some video that he has recorded of the sun in hydrogen alpha through the Astronomical Society of Victoria's 4-inch Lunt solar telescope. Though monochrome, the video feed will show high contrast views of the chromosphere, including sunspots, filaments, prominences, and granulation, both in the context of the full solar disk, but also close up. So hello, Russell, and welcome to stream session 4.
Hello, Stuart, and hello, everyone listening in on this solar demonstration. So thank you very much for that introduction, Stuart, very much appreciated. And today's solar demonstration is brought to you by the Astronomical Society of Victoria. Now, today, unfortunately, the weather is against us. There are quite thick clouds in the north, which are obscuring the sun, so we won't be able to do a direct which will give you a pretty good idea of how a live demonstration would take place. Now, please bear in mind that any attempt to look at the sun with your eyes or an optical device such as binoculars your equipment is fully filtered to protect your eyes from damage. Please remember that. Okay, so let's have a look at the equipment. So here's an image of the equipment set up on my balcony here in Elwood, just 6 kilometres from the central business district of Melbourne. So here we have my laptop, which will show the videos. It's connected to a video camera here, which is monochrome but high performance. An equatorial mount, which is roughly aligned to the south celestial pole. And in so doing, it means that I can direct the telescope to the sun, and the motorized mount will keep tracking the sun. Okay, so this looks like pretty much any old sort of refracting telescope, but down here is the most important part of all. There's a special optic in there that rejects all of the sunlight apart from a small sliver of red light, which is the hydrogen alpha wavelength, and lets that light through almost to the camera. But in here, this part here, is another special filter which is called an infrared blocking filter, which removes the infrared or the heat output from that special optic here before it goes to the camera or to my eye or someone else's eye, and therefore provides a perfectly safe view of the sun in the gorgeous red color of hydrogen alpha. But because the telescope lets such a little sliver of light through, and because there's this effect called the Doppler effect, the sun is rotating so that the edge of the sun that is rotating towards us, the hydrogen alpha wavelength is slightly shorter, and the edge of the sun which is rotating away from us, the hydrogen alpha wavelength is slightly lengthened. And the amount of light that this telescope goes through means that hydrogen alpha bandpass, it's called, coming through the telescope needs to be shifted somewhat in order to see the edges of the sun in the sharp relief. And I'll show you this in this video here. So here's a video of the sun before the telescope is tuned. You notice a lot of the sun here is properly exposed, but there's a region up here which is overexposed, which means that this region of the sun is allowing more hydrogen alpha light through the telescope into the camera than this region here. But by tuning the hydrogen alpha band pass coming through to the video camera, one can, with a little bit of practice, end up with a image of the sun which is nicely exposed, and we'll see it on this image right here. There we are. So this is very much how the eye would see the sun on a day like today. Apart from the brilliant red, beautiful red color, which is not visible, you'll see some sunspots. There's a sunspot here and a sunspot there, and this whiter area is called an active region. That's where flares are exploding on the sun. There's evidence of a prominence just over here, a site of a flare that has blasted stuff into space with the energy of hundreds of thousands to millions of atom bombs going off simultaneously. And also you'll notice a lot of low contrast features on the disk of the sun, and these with attention are easily visible to the eye through a telescope like this. Now I should point out that the sun could be considered as a bit like an onion with these various layers on it, and that dazzling sun that we enjoy during the daytime, that light is coming from a layer of the sun called the photosphere, which has got a temperature of about 5,500 degrees Celsius. The area of the sun that this hydrogen alpha telescope is observing is a thin layer about 10,000 to 15,000 kilometers above the photosphere. And this region is called the chromosphere, chromo or chromos being the Greek word for color. And this is where most of the hydrogen alpha comes from. The photosphere is far, far, far brighter than the chromosphere, hence we not even aware of the chromosphere during daytime, because the brilliant light of the photosphere completely overwhelms it. And I must point out as well, the only other time that we can safely see the chromosphere with our naked eyes is during a total solar eclipse. Just before the moon completely covers the sun, there's this beautiful red band light becomes visible for a few seconds before the moon either starts moving off the sun or moves over to completely cover the sun. Okay, so this is what the sun would look like in hydrogen alpha with your eye through this telescope. And I'll continue playing the video now. And what I'm doing here is adjusting the contrast on the video camera. Now, this is something we can't do easily when we're looking at with our eyes through a telescope, a solar telescope. However, this telescope does come with a second optic, which allows to improve the contrast for visual use. This is one area where videos are slightly better than seeing it with our own eyes, because we can play around with the image and enhance certain features, makes them far more visible. Okay, so already we are starting to see the features on the sun in far better and higher contrast. This video will just keep playing and playing and playing. As I said, I've got some sunspots here, got some of these white areas which we call active regions, sites of energy being released, prominence around the edge, and so and that would allow the operator of the telescope with a video to target areas of interest on the solar disk. So please ask any questions as they come along. Just write them on Facebook or whatever, so that I can sort out any questions that you might have as we go along, so that they're fresh in your minds. Okay, so let's zoom in on one of the active regions that we saw on that previous video. And here we are. Image of a sunspot, and this active region, every active region on the sun, or every sunspot which has an active region associated with it, is given a number, and this the number of this particular active region is AR, which stands for active region 2887. Now there's actually a 1 comes before 2887, so it's actually 12,887, but that 1 is assumed, so it's not written in. And the reason, well, as scientists, we love to give numbers to everything that we can observe or measure, just to categorize it, so for future reference we can refer to this active region AR2887, and everyone knows what we're talking about. Now, as the video is playing, you can see that the sun seems to be sort of bouncing around a little bit, and there's this sort of movement. Now, all of those effects are simply due to the Earth's atmosphere. Remember, we're looking through about 100 kilometers or so of Earth's atmosphere. It's and the sun is beating down on the Earth, i.e., the ground, heating up the ground. Then the warm ground then gives heats up the air, and that air rises. And I'm doing these effects with my hands, and you probably won't be able to see them, but that causes turbulence, which causes the light from the sun to be slightly bent and moving around. So if we're up in space looking at the sun, we would not see those jittery effects, because they are simply a product of the Earth's atmosphere, and that is, well, what happens when we observe the sun during daytime. This so-called atmospheric seeing tends to be not as good as it is at night when things have cooled down. But here we are. I've just adjusted the contrast again to bring in the essential features on this video, and there's that sunspot and these active regions, and this little black thing here, that's called a filament. Now, if you can remember in your mind's eye images of the sun, you can see these so-called prominences around the edge. Some people call them flares, a little bit mistakenly. They are caused by flares, but they're not actually flares. These are called prominences, these little red bits of sun that are sticking into space from actual flare explosions. But when one of these prominences is viewed against the solar disk, it looks like a little black hairline structure, and we call those filaments. And here's another one, another filament here, and another filament over there, and here's another active region. And have a look at the structures here on the solar chromosphere. Notice in the region of this sunspot, not only do you have sort of a chaotic, ill-defined light and shade, but you're starting to have some quite structured light and shade here. And this is all because the sun's magnetic field, internal magnetic field, breaks through into the chromosphere. And because the sun is a huge ball of plasma, it means that the solar stuff must follow those magnetic lines of force. And we can see that as structure around sunspots. So
Excuse
around
me,
here as
Russell,
well.
you have a question.
Oh, that's excellent. Please, fire away.
From a Roger Groom. Is this what would be called a double stacked solar telescope, or single? Looking at single
Well, we call
versus
this a
double.
single stacked. Indeed, Roger. Yes, this would be a single stacked because I've only got one stack there. But for the best visual viewing of the sun, a double stack certainly gives sharper and more contrasty views. So thanks very much for that question. Okay, so we'll just keep playing that. So there's a close-up, and I should point out that this sunspot would probably, that area that I'm moving around with my cursor, that is probably about the size of the Earth in comparison to the size of that sunspot. So although these sunspots look pretty small against the sun, they are quite large when compared with the Earth. So moving on. showing that same active region again, but now I'm going to increase the exposure and the gain on the camera. That'll burn out the sun's chromosphere, but it'll start to show some prominences around the edge. So look around here. There's a prominence starting to become visible because I'm increasing the amount of gain on the camera. And there's a prominence here and a prominence there, and I'll finish this video before we get to the end. There we are. So those prominences were always there on the video shot that had the chromosphere nicely exposed, but by increasing the exposure on the camera, that will help to bring out these wonderful prominences around the edge. And notice they're all different shapes and sizes. A little one here, and one here looks like a bit of a loop, and one that looks a bit like a flame coming off, and this one looks a little bit like a hedgerow. Another one that looks a little bit like an arch. But and once again, this is one of the advantages of using a video camera, that videos can be recorded and we can have a look at them whenever we like, and play around with videos and enjoy our hobby of being a solar observer.
Russell, are you ready for another question?
Absolutely.
Andrew Hayes asks, "Hi Russell, what are your thoughts on solar filters? I have an 8-inch SCT and Celestron solar filter which replaces the main dust cover. Are these any good or not recommended for solar viewing?"
Well, they are well recommended for solar viewing. But please bear in mind these filters that go over the front, I presume it's a metallized mylar. It's just a shiny sheet of plastic that goes over the front of your telescope, and they are excellent for viewing sunspots. So these are called white light filters because every wavelength of light that goes through the filter is attenuated or cut off to an equal extent, and great for seeing sunspots perfectly safely. But I'd have to qualify that by saying every time you take your filter out, before putting on your telescope, hold it up to the sun and move it around, and look for any pinholes or any scratches that may have occurred during storage of your filter. And also I'd recommend you store your filter in a biscuit tin or something like that that will keep dust and keep it safe. But yes, they are highly recommended for solar observing with those safeguards. Certainly. Thanks for the question. So this is the northwest edge of the sun, where I've simply, when the video is being taken, I've simply adjusted the exposure and the gain to let more light through onto the camera, onto the chip, and ultimately that will allow some of the much fainter prominences to come through. And this is a pretty good indication of, in general, how much fainter prominences are compared with the disk of the sun. Prominences, because they're narrow in space, are a little bit cooler than the chromosphere itself, and coolness equals slightly less light, and hence means darker. Now I should point that out a little bit better here on this video. Although these sunspots look to be quite dark, they're only a couple of 100 degrees cooler than the average temperature of whatever surface we're looking at, the chromosphere in this case, or the photosphere when we are observing the sun in white light. And these active regions, though they look quite white, they're probably only a few 100 degrees hotter than the average temperature around there. So it's pretty amazing that just a few 100 degrees either way from average temperature can make something look dark or something look white. But that's all about contrast.
You have another question, Russell?
Certainly.
From Sergio Maranzek from Brazil. Lots of solar flares in the sun. Is there a cycle for them?
Yes, there is, and thank you very, very much for asking that question. If you look at the program, I'll be giving a talk on highlights of the solar cycle next Saturday, starting at 9 a.m. Local time here in Melbourne, where we'll touch upon the solar cycle, the 11-year cycle of sunspots and solar activity. But yes, there is a solar cycle of roughly 11 years, which can be easily measured by looking at the sun and measuring how many sunspots are visible from day to day. So thank you very, very much for that question and for giving me the cue for that plug. Thanks very much. Just continuing with the video now, and we're now looking at the southeastern limb of the sun, and this wonderful this wonderful prominence sticking out into space there. And I'm just increasing the gain and the exposure, and you can see there are some much fainter aspects of this prominence as well. There we are, just to the left of it as we see it. And you know, ladies and gentlemen, that's something that I so much enjoy about observing the sun. A, I can do it safely. B, I can use some high quality equipment for that. And I think we're down to C on that list. But C, I just get to enjoy the sun from day to day because the sun is always changing. And at the very end of this talk, I'll just show you what changes can be detected in prominences in just 1 hour and a half of our human time. So we'll keep working on this. And this video coming up would have to be my favorite video of this particular event. Once again, just increasing the gain and the exposure on the camera to bring out these highly detailed prominences on the this would be the western edge of the sun. I would say looking at the sun visually, obviously with our eye through this telescope, we would be pretty hard pressed to see the finer aspects of these prominences coming out, simply because our eye, would have trouble detecting that fairly faint hydrogen alpha light that is coming through. But the camera, the chip can be, the electronics can really be pushed to the limit to bring out these faint and subtle effects that the eye might otherwise miss. Now I'll play this image again. This is of the entire sun. I'll just leave it there. So this video contains, well, crikey, a number of frames per second. Okay, that's limited by, well, the software or by the user. But let's just say there are 30 frames per second, and this video goes for 23 seconds. So multiply 23 seconds by 30, and that's the number of still frames available. And there are programs out there. AutoStackit is a very, very good program. We can load in a video, and the program will select the sharpest frames from your video. So bear in mind, when you remember looking at the sun, it's all the Earth's atmosphere is affecting the clarity. But this program will select the sharpest frames, i.e. when the air is stillest, and you can put them together, and so this same image here, when it's gone through AutoStackit and other programs, will come and look like an image like this. How wonderful is that? So this is, although I put the yellow color on afterwards, it would be a black and white or a monochrome image. But imagine this is how the sun would look using a hydrogen alpha telescope out in space, for example, where there's no effects of the atmosphere. High contrast features, lots of prominences around the edge, all different shapes and sizes, active regions, all that gorgeous granulation on the chromosphere itself. And once again, well, some extreme and important advantages of taking recordings of the sun in this case, because we can play around with them. Clever people out there have devised programs that we can put our data, our images, our videos into, and recover some absolutely fabulous images at the end.
Russell, another question.
Yes, keep them coming.
Toner Stevenson.
Hello,
Our
Toner.
sun, our sun is such an important star to our existence on this planet. Do you think enough research has been done or is being done to fully understand it?
That's an excellent question, Toner, and thanks for watching. Crikey, I have to say, NASA, ESA, and various other organizations are spending billions of dollars on solar probes. Um, the SOHO probe was launched in 1990, I think, and it's still going strong 30 years later. And these probes are very, very important for our technology on the Earth because the sun can be extremely dangerous as far as our modern technology is concerned. These massive eruptions on the sun can lead to conditions at Earth which are called solar storms, and these can have very damaging results to our GPS satellites or our communication satellites, our power grids here on the Earth. And so, yes, when I say we, science is devoting a lot of time and money to the constant observation of the sun. Um, to learn more about the dynamics of our own star, but B, also to be aware of solar storms and to have even a couple of hours warning as to whether a solar storm will pass by Earth, and give our technical people time to put our electrical grids or our satellites into safe mode to prevent them from being damaged by solar activity. So I think we are spending a lot. Well, we are spending a lot of money, and there are some beautiful results yet to come from the Parker Solar Probe, for example, and the Solar Orbiter probe, which are currently doing their thing in their own ways, and telling us more about how the sun actually behaves. So thank you very much for that question. I hope I've answered it appropriately for you. So here's a video of our overexposed chromosphere, but just showing the enormous number of prominences around the edge. And once again, a plug for the highlights of the solar cycle 25. The sun has only had its solar minimum in 2019, and it's just starting to wake up towards solar maximum in 2024, 2025. The exact time is not known for sure. When we'll be seeing more and more prominences on the sun as the years go by. So it's an exciting time to be a solar observer. More and bigger sunspots, more and more energetic flares, and more and brighter prominences visible around the edge of the sun. So it's a wonderful time to be, as I say, a solar observer. So just have a look at those prominences, and I just want you to concentrate on this area here, because I've done a before and after 2-image video called an animated GIF, which where the time between the first and the second is about an hour and a half. And this is just to show you how dynamic the sun is. And I've seen this myself. I've looked at the sun perhaps in the morning, come back a couple of hours later and had another look at the sun, and the prominences have actually changed shape and their structure in just an hour and a half. Think about that. So here we go. I'll finish off with this last image.
Just before you do, Russ,
yes.
Roger Groom has put in a question.
Thanks, Roger.
We have a notable solar eclipse next year in WA. Any advice on the usefulness of a hydrogen alpha solar filter for an eclipse versus a white light filter?
That's an excellent question. Really, really excellent. How can we answer this? Well, a hydrogen alpha telescope won't be that useful during totality. Bearing in mind, totality is a maximum of a minute, and you'd be want to spending all of your time, those precious seconds, looking at the sun safely with your eyes or through a telescope. But during the partial phases, that is a particularly good time to be using a hydrogen alpha telescope, because you'll see the moon, the inky black moon moving across the sun's chromosphere, and you'll see sunspots and perhaps active regions slowly get consumed as the moon passes across the face of the sun. So I think it's up to you. Have a look on the web for similar partial eclipses that have been observed through hydrogen alpha telescopes, and you can get a feel for what you might expect to see and photograph. But so I hope that answers your question. There are some pros and cons, as I've already indicated, but certainly partial phases are special, taken through a hydrogen alpha telescope. Okay, so everyone, I'll just finish off with this animated GIF here. And there's the timestamp just down here. And there's the 26th of October 21 when I took it. And this is before and this is after. So have a look at the change in the prominence over here. Okay, the exposure for the second image is slightly greater, but nevertheless, even taking the difference in exposures into account, this prominence here is actually smaller with the higher exposure, so it's diminished quite a bit. This one's taken on a different shape, and this prominence up here has changed its shape as well. So this is just over an hour and a half, ladies and gentlemen, that our own star, 150 million kilometers away, is a dynamic object and can literally change before our eyes in half an hour, hour and a half. So just please be aware of that. There's always something happening on our sun. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think I will finish off this solar demonstration. Any further questions you might like to ask? I'm all yours.
Okay, one from David O'Driscoll.
Hi, David.
If solar maximum is due in 2025 or thereabouts, is that the best time to view or to see the aurora borealis?
Great question, David. Well, for us here in the southern hemisphere, we refer to it as the aurora australis, the southern lights. Not necessarily, and I'm saying this because the past couple of months the sun is nowhere near its maximum in solar activity. Yet some beautiful aurorae have been visible from southern Victoria or Tasmania, New Zealand, and of course in the northern hemisphere, Alaska, the northern tier states of the USA, Scotland, Scandinavia. So I certainly would not wait till a solar maximum in 2024, 2025 to think about seeing the aurorae. They are happening right now. It all depends on conditions on the sun, M-class or X-class flares. So be prepared right now to see aurorae, and I will show a couple of pictures of recent aurorae in my presentation with John Wilkinson on the 23rd of April at 9 a.m. But they're happening right now, so go out and enjoy nature's beauty. Thanks very much, David.
Another one from Doug Stenhouse. Greetings from Ballarat, Russell.
Hello, Doug.
Great talk. I always find solar observation fascinating. You may have already covered this, but do you have any opinion on using mylar solar film?
Oh, absolutely. That was my reference to the person who had the Celestron 8-inch reflecting telescope. That metallized plastic film that is a metallized mylar film. So I recommend such safe solar filters for putting over the front of your telescope. But please, the caveat always is that it is known as a safety solar film, that it is for visual use, and that before you put it onto your telescope and use it, that you check it beforehand for any scratches or dust or defects that might allow the full sun's light into your optic and therefore into your eye. But safe solar film is recommended for observing sunspots any time of the year.
Just another question, Russ,
Great.
from a Lou Shiota, and I'm sure I've pronounced that incorrect, so apologies in advance. Came across a theory recently in Astronomy magazine that there is a plasma veil surrounding the sun, and some of the features we can observe are actually folds in this veil. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think I need to do a little bit more research on the sun because I haven't picked up that solar veil theory or observation. There is so much that we don't know about the sun, and so much that we are learning as we go along. I can't comment on that solar veil hypothesis, but it certainly can make sense. I think I do recall something very recently about perhaps an optical illusion about loops of plasma, but I can't comment anymore because it's a little bit out of my current knowledge. But thanks very much for giving me a lead in further research into up-to-date observations and theories about the sun. Thank you.
All right. Well, I think that's just about it for questions, Russ. So we might just leave it there and move on with our next presentation. So thank you very much.
And thank you, everyone. And please just remember to check out the highlights of Solar Cycle 25, April 23rd, starting at 9 a.m. We can learn more about the sun. So thanks very much for attending, everyone, and have a good day. Bye for now.
Okay. Our next presentation is entitled Lands of Ice and Snow by Stephen Russell. Stephen has been involved with NACAA since he attended his first one in 1970. Since then, he has attended almost all of the conventions and played various roles behind the scenes since the formation of NACAA Inc. Stephen is currently chair of the NACAA program committee. So welcome to the stream, to this session, Steve.
Thanks very much. Hope everyone can hear me okay. And I'm sorry that I can't get to see you all. Hopefully next time we'll get to do a bit of face-to-face. So it seems to have switched over there. That's good. So, as I say, I want to talk about Lands of Ice and Snow, which is, as you can see in that picture there that I just got rid of, Antarctica and such, other places as well. So, many of you all know that I like chasing eclipses, not always successfully, unfortunately. Back in 2020, I had hoped to go to southern Chile to see the eclipse there. Unfortunately, we couldn't make it because of COVID. So then I started thinking maybe I could go to the 2021 event. So a little bit of story about it. Here you can see a picture of the eclipse path as it passes over Antarctica there. Very difficult to get to. It's a long way to go, made worse by the situation with Corona. Weather forecasts were dismal. A lot of the people were concentrating on cruise ships coming out of this sort of area. So coming down from the Falkland Islands and sort of heading over here to catch the eclipse. I wasn't overly interested in those because I thought that taking photographs from a moving liner in the middle of the South Atlantic Ocean wasn't really going to be a good choice. And also pretty expensive. You could pay anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000 for a berth on one of these ships. There weren't even a lot of flights being organised. There was one that was planned to come out of Melbourne. It was there for a little while, then it disappeared again. Some of these cruises end up being cancelled anyway because of COVID and what have you. But then what changed was that in November, a year and a half ago, I received a message from a cruise company called Ponant. They're based out of France. And I talked to them in the past about perhaps being a speaker on one of their cruises or something like that. So they contacted me and said, we're going to Antarctica. on this ship you can see in the background there. It's above the water, it's a luxury cruise liner. Below the water, it's actually an icebreaker. It's one of the first of its kind. Actually, I think it is the first. There are now others being built because it allows them to do exactly what you can see there, actually go through ice. In the past, they would be stopped by the ice unless they were lucky enough to follow along behind an icebreaker or something. When they did their maiden voyage with this ship, it was built in Finland. They sailed up to the North Pole and back just to prove it could actually work. And being French, it had French food, French wine, and penguins and seals and scuba diving. Didn't get to do the scuba diving. That was one of the options, though. I really was looking forward to it, but they required that you have a lot of experience at cold water diving. And I didn't think I'd be able to organise in time to get the appropriate training. So that wasn't going to happen. Another nice thing about the trip, they were planning to head to the Weddell Sea. I'll show you a map later on of where they were planning to go. And their plan was to actually photograph from the ice rather than from the ship. And I thought that's perfect because at least, you can get out of the ship, set up tripods and cameras and things and take photographs. That wasn't cheap, around $25,000 each, but I did convince my buddy Darren, who's been into a few eclipses with me, to share the cost. And it was also gave us a second opportunity to visit Patagonia. As I said, we missed out on the 2020 event, and we were looking forward to seeing parts of Patagonia so that where we could do that. That was like a year before we departed, back in November 2020. I'm thinking surely within 12 months, COVID will be sorted out. Not quite. Whoops. Yeah, mission impossible getting there. So basically, as you know, our borders were closed in both directions. We couldn't go out. We couldn't come back in again. Chile was also closed down in 2020 and 2021. Earlier, Qantas and LATAM were showing flights from Sydney to Santiago. Then eventually they disappeared, and they haven't really reappeared even now. So we got to August 2021, and Ponant contacted us, said, we're going to cancel your booking because we don't think there's any chance you'll be able to make it. And we said, well, we've got till the end of October to make the final payment. Can you leave us in the system? We then tried to get exemptions from the government to be able to leave the country, and they were just rejected out of hand. And you'd only apply a few weeks out from departure. You couldn't apply months in advance. So it made it really hard to do the planning. We didn't get much help from our local MP, unfortunately. So it was looking pretty bleak there around May, June last year. And then things magically started to happen. Flights to the US opened up again. And you probably know, or some of you anyway, will know that New South Wales decided it was going to open its border on November the 1st if you were double vaccinated, which we were. And then Chile did the same sort of thing. They basically had, yes, you could fly into Chile, but you're required to be isolated for several days. And you had to sort of check in with an app each day, which was going to make it a little bit complicated because we thought we might have to actually arrive days before the departure of the ship. One other thing that they changed originally, the ship was going to leave from Ushuaia in southern Argentina. That's their preferred port to leave from. But we worked with the Chilean authorities to get permission to leave from Punta Arenas instead. So right down here in the Magellan Strait. And then that meant we just had a flight from Santiago to another part of Chile. We didn't have to leave the country, go into Argentina and come back again because Argentina wasn't really open. So we found ourselves suddenly, we can make this work. And we had a little bit of extra luck because the ship came back into Punta Arenas. That allowed us to, rather than flying all the way back from, say, Argentina to Santiago, then all the way back down to Punta Arenas, basically, or somewhere nearby, we were able to just get off the ship at the end of the cruise and just travel. So I'll show you some of those maps and things later on. So we made it. We managed to actually get our flights organized and everything. It was pretty complicated. I'll explain that in a moment. So we were able to make our final payments to Ponant with just a few days to spare, about a month or so before departure. Then it got a bit complicated, as I said, because we had all these requirements for vaccinations and tests and things like that in Australia, in the USA and Chile. The airlines had their own requirements, and we flew with a lot of different airlines because we had to go via North America, as I said. Airline schedules kept changing. We thought we had something booked from Los Angeles through Peru down to Santiago, and LATAM changed their schedule, and the changeover time wasn't long enough anymore. Luckily, we had a very good travel agent. If anybody interested in getting a good travel agent, contact me and I'll give you Dion's details. She looked after all the stuff. Ended up with a stack of paper about that thick of all the stuff we had to do along the way, which included a pile of tests. There were seven swabs up your nose kind of tests, and a couple of rat tests as well. Because to get into America, we had to get tested on the way out, and so on. It was just, even here down in not Patagonian, down here where we were staying, we had to get a test done then so we could actually fly back into America and so on. So we came through Los Angeles, down through Mexico City, which was a disaster, and then finally got to Santiago. More about that in a moment. Coming back, we came back by Houston and San Francisco. That was because we weren't sure whether we'd be able to stay in Chile after we got off the ship. Even that wasn't clear until later. So we booked to fly back from San Francisco. And if we had to leave early, we could spend a few days in San Francisco before we flew home. Notice we took Fiji Airways. I recommend them. They were good. 51,800 kilometers of flying. We managed to get to Punta Arenas, where the ship was. When I was looking for a picture of a rat to use on this map, I discovered that the rats on the internet don't have testicles. They're all sort of blurry for some strange reason. I don't understand that. Anyway, getting ready. Here's the equipment. Whoops, I skipped over a slide, but that's okay. Actually, no, we'll go back. Sorry, guys. It's hard to read it anyway. No, let me go. Yeah, lots of ideas, but zero experience at working in sub-zero environments, because that's what we were expecting. It was supposed to be very cold. We were worried about things like the lenses icing up, batteries running out of power because of the cold temperatures and so on. So what I ended up doing, after throwing around a lot of ideas, I decided to keep it as simple as possible and just use a single camera. So here's the equipment I was using. Basically, there's a lens heater there, as you can see, dew cap and a solar filter on the front. Actually, that got changed later on, but it doesn't matter. You'll notice I had an external monitor, which I just started using recently. For those of you who are doing this kind of photography, I strongly recommend having a look at one of those. Because you can zoom in and with like an eye magnifier, you can see each individual pixel. And they have an amazing function called focus peaking, P-E-A-K-I-N-G. And it allows you to pick a color like green, for example, and then all the sharp edges will be drawn with a green line. So you actually see the focus coming into play. And I tried it on things like crescent moon and stuff like that. And sure enough, you get a nice clean edge that sort of shows you how the focus is coming along. So I've got a 100-400 telephoto, Canon telephoto lens, as you can see, with a 1.4 extender. And that combination, it turned out, worked really well. So somehow just the two of them together are sort of sharper than the lens on its own. I don't know why, but just nice combination. Also external batteries, they was like with USB leads, so you could use charging packs and what have you, which we thought, okay, we'll keep those in our pockets or something to keep them warm, and we could switch over from one to another if we need to. We can run two in parallel, that sort of thing. But again, it's pretty hard to test, though it does get a bit cold here in Orange in winter. It does snow occasionally. Rather hard to test this sort of equipment to see how it was going to perform on the day. All right, so getting there turned out to be a lot of flying, as you saw. But basically, this is something I've never seen before. This is Sydney Airport, International Airport. As you can see, there's one person there. There's actually a few more around the corner here, but I just took this shot. I thought, yeah, amazing. I've never seen an airport quite so empty. This was at the end of November last year. Nandi was the same. In fact, actually in Sydney and in Nandi, the clubs were closed. The frequent flyer clubs were closed. Whereas LA was very, very busy. Lots of people there checking in and heading off to other places. As I said, Mexico was a disaster, which I'll leave alone. Santiago was great. We arrived there in the morning and we had to sort of join a large queue of people who were being tested at the airport. We then had to go straight to our hotel. The good news was that once we sort of got out of Customs Immigration and the testing center, we finally got to meet the people from Ponant, and then it was their problem to get us to the Eclipse rather than our problem. But yeah, lots of traveling, lots of stops along the way. But yeah, we did eventually make it. So here's the ship again. This is in Punta Arenas, and our cabin was up around there somewhere. Okay. Luxury ship, as I say, this is just a small one. They normally have around about 270, 280 passengers and something like 300 crew. I heard that they only had about 180 on the actual cruise, because people did cancel because they just thought they wouldn't be able to make it and wanted to get their deposit back. And also we had some people who'd come from other cruise ships that were cancelled. All right. I say what's the name again? Not that it matters. Greg Mortimer ship, named after Greg Mortimer, the guy. Obviously, the Greg Mortimer was cancelled, for example. We had a few people ended up on this one because this was one of the few ships that actually bothered to go. All right, let's talk about the eclipse itself. And I'll talk about the lands of ice and snow. Unfortunately, things didn't work out the way we had planned. So we were supposed to be down here somewhere in the sort of south, on the Weddell ice shelf area down here. We knew we were in trouble when we went to the briefing session, which they held on day 2, because it took forever to go on board the ship, but that's another story. They started with lots of expectation management, saying things like, you will be in the shadow. That's going to be amazing. I wanted to see the eclipse. I didn't want to see the shadow, all right? Not on the clouds. If anyone can find a hole in the cloud, our Capitan can, all right? He was quite a character, the captain, actually. So suddenly all the plans go out the door. I'm thinking, that's it. If we're going to be doing it from a ship that's moving around like this, up and down, left and right. So really, there's no way I could do long telephoto shots and stuff like that, except if I got incredibly lucky and the sun happens to be in front of the camera as I'm taking a shot, So all I could do was say, go wide angle instead, do a lot of auto bracketing. Each time I could sort of get to see the sun, just take a shot, take 3 or 4 shots auto bracketed. But that was about all I could do. So yeah, we ended up going, as you can see, out past the South Orkney Islands and out here, because the weather forecasts, they were the best they could see. But even so, things were pretty terrible. So certainly the eclipse, you can see on this day, it was a bit cloudy. Turned out we had some sunny weather the earlier in the day. But as we started getting closer and closer to the eclipse zone, it got cloudier and cloudier. So the eclipse was quite early in the morning. I've forgotten what it was now, like 4 a.m. Chilean time or something like that. Because as you can imagine, the sun sort of sets just below the horizon at about 11 o'clock and rises again about 1 o'clock, because by this stage, it was early December. So we didn't quite get far enough south for it to stay above the horizon the whole time. But when we sailed out there, and this is the morning of the eclipse. Here's all my gear ready to go, including the gloves and stuff, because it was quite cold outside. Unfortunately, this is what actually happened. As you can see, a lot of people out there, there's a bit of sun around, but it's completely covered by cloud. And it was a bit cloudier later on, but also getting a bit darker, all right? And then eventually, this is actually mid-eclipse. It's completely overcast, okay? So yes, we definitely did go into the shadow. Unfortunately, that's all we saw. So all that planning and gear and all the rest of it, a bit of a waste of time, except for the camera. It came in very handy for seeing other parts of the countryside, the Antarctica and back into Punta Arenas and so on. So here's our path. From after the eclipse, we sailed down and sort of worked our way around the coast of the Antarctic Peninsula there and sailed back out again. I guess the downside of, because we did have that long trip out to the eclipse and then back again, we didn't spend as much time in Antarctica we probably would have normally, okay? In which case, yeah, we would have probably got down to the Antarctic Circle. But yeah, we spent 3 or 4 days sailing to and from the eclipse. So that reduced the number of days we got to spend here, which is a shame. But that's, that was always going to be the plan. We did get to go ashore a couple of times, but not every day, because it was quite warm down there. I was surprised how warm it was. You may have heard recent reports that there's been a very warm in the North and South Poles recently. It was actually colder in the South Atlantic than it was in Antarctica. It was probably 5 to 9 degrees most days. So that meant it was the ice was a bit unstable. It was melting basically. So they didn't want us to go ashore because we could end up to our necks or something in icy water or so on. So we just spent a few days where the ship just sat there and they took Zodiacs out and people cruised around and had a look at things, but you couldn't go ashore because it wasn't safe, which is also a shame because I didn't want to try and take photographs from the back of a Zodiac with a tripod and stuff, So we were just sitting on the ship or walking around taking lots and lots of photographs. I probably took about 3,000, partly because I was doing a lot of auto bracketing, but I'll say more about that when we get to the photos later on. There were definitely icebergs down there, lots and lots of icebergs. There were orcas one day we came across a pod of orcas who were playing around near the front of the ship. There were penguins, not as many as I expected, to be honest. A few of the islands we went to, there was no wildlife at all. No plant life either, just basically rock and ice and snow. Yeah, but there were penguins, a few penguins. These ones were actually on a small piece of ice that was floating out away the other direction from the ship. I guess it doesn't really affect them. They could always go swimming back or something, but they're no longer attached to the main ice flow. But yeah, then there was a few more who saw us coming and decided to run away. And there's a few more as well. Okay, so there were some penguins. There were also seals, yeah, not surprisingly, but they were all a long way away. And there were also telescopes, believe it or not. Now, we've got a talk coming up next week about these sort of little robotic telescopes. This is a new version. Let me just turn that laser pointer off for a second, and I'll take you through to, see if I can bring this up. Come on. Show it to me. Sorry, I should have queued that up earlier. There it is there. So it's just come out in the last few months. And it's the new generation. This is the same company that produced the one you've probably seen with the sort of fork mount arrangement, the telescope swinging through in the middle. This is a more compact format of that. And I'm assuming the guy took it there so he could take lots of photographs of it, but hopefully, I think he was probably going to try and photograph the eclipse as well. He did have it set up out on one of the decks. But yeah, this is the new robotic little miniaturized telescope, which, yeah, we'll get to hear about those sort of things next week. So, yep, he took it, as I say, any opportunity he had, he took it out to take photographs of it near the ice and snow. Anyway, unfortunately, that cruise had to end eventually. In fact, we ended a little bit earlier than expected. Normally, they sail, overnight, you get off in the morning. But we had to have another set of tests when we got back into Chile. More probes up the nose. That was another rat test to check that everything was okay before they'd let us off the ship the next day. So we lost probably half a day as well because of that. But it was a fantastic cruise. I can strongly recommend Ponant for those who enjoy luxury and had the money. As I say, they weren't that much more expensive than most of the other cruises. They were much more stylish, shall we say. Very good food and an amazing wine cellar. One of the best wine cellars I've ever seen, outside of, probably somewhere in Paris or something. Truly extraordinary. All right, and then, as I mentioned, after we got off the ship, we were able to just basically get off and go into a taxi up to the airport. Actually, we picked up a car because we were going to drop it back there when we got back. And we went off and did a drive through Patagonia. So we started, here it is, Punta Arenas down the bottom. Let me get that laser pointer back again. Come on here. Where's that mouse pointer gone? I've got 3 screens and it's hiding somewhere. There it is. Okay, so we started in Punta Arenas. We drove up to Puerto Natales for lunch. And we stayed at a lodge, as they called it, right next to the Torres del Paine National Park, which is a spectacular piece of countryside. And that's what we wanted to go to on the previous trip. We were staying a bit further north in the Lakes District, further up in Chile. Then we're going to fly down here to have a look around. So we got to see it finally. And then after we did the trip back to Punta Arenas, we flew back to Santiago, Houston, and San Francisco. And we got home on Christmas morning because that was just the way the schedule worked out. So up here, there were certainly mountains. This is not one of the best shots I've got, but this is something, well, just sort of late sunlight. You can sort of see the sun is going down and it's not real bright. There were lakes and glaciers. This is the Grey Lake, as it's called, and that's the Grey Glacier. And I've got other shots that are coming up later. And there were also these things called guanacos. Okay. Now, this picture caught me by surprise because if you can probably see it as well. It's painted. It's stylized. But that wasn't deliberate on my part. I took this shot with just a Nikon Coolpix. It's actually an underwater camera that I use when I go scuba diving. And I must have accidentally switched it into artistic mode because all the shots of the guanacos are all as if somebody's come along and painted it with brush strokes and stuff. So no, they don't normally look like that. They are very tasty though, for those who aren't vegetarians. They're just a native llama species in the mountains there around this area. And yeah, it pops up on quite a few menus. Alrighty, so I'm going through this quite quickly. We're going to be finished quite early. I do apologize, guys. Thought I was going to take longer. Anyway, let's us talk about my slides. And now, as I said, I was taking a lot of photographs, partly because I had the camera on sort of burst mode, so it was take multiple shots as I held the trigger down. But I also set it up to do auto bracketing. And that's because, you know, as soon as we saw the environment, you've got very bright snow or ice, and you've got very dark rocks. But there's detail in both of those. You know, the ice does have some interesting formations and stuff. And then you have the formations in the rocks and so on as well. So to try and capture that full dynamic range, I do the same thing that, you know, astrophotographers do. You need to take multiple exposures, particularly eclipse photography. You take multiple exposures and then bring them together to get a high definition image. So I took about 3,000 or 4,000 shots in total across different cameras and things. Had some wide angle stuff as well. Don't have a lot of medium shots because my 18-200 zoom died on the first day on the ice. I don't know why, just something just locked up inside, and it wasn't frozen or anything, it wasn't that cold. But unfortunately, that meant I no longer had a medium range. I only had some wide angle lenses and that telephoto you saw earlier. So lots and lots of close-up shots of, and a few panoramas as well of the thing. The actual high dynamic range images that you're going to see were not created by me, or one of them I think I've done, because having so many shots to choose from, having to go through and sort of automate the process of creating the HDR images. I have tried a couple of products that are out there that say that they can do that sort of thing, you know, that they'll do batch conversions for you and find the group of photos that were taken at almost exactly the same time and then, you know, group them together. And I tried a few of those and none of them worked very well. What then happened was after I got home and I'd uploaded all my images, Google started sending me links saying, by the way, we've been working on this for you, sort of thing. They have their machine learning systems go out and find photographs and do enhancements and stuff on them. And they'd actually done the HDR work for me. They gave me about 20 or 30 shots where they'd already done it. Not only have they done the HDR, they've also done a little bit of the color adjustments and tonal adjustments as well. They've actually done a pretty good job. Now what I have to do is find the time for me to sit down and do the same thing myself with the same shots. Because some of them, the HDRs, are also go together to make up a panorama, and they haven't done both things. So you can do the panorama on the HDR shots, which is a shame. But yeah, now I'm going to have a slideshow. It's only going to run for a few minutes, guys. Remember the old days of slides and projectors and what I did on my holidays kind of thing? Here's my version. And thanks very much to Tangerine Dream for providing the music. And it's amazing they're still going, although one of their members died. That's looping again. That's no good. I have to turn my sound off. I have no idea why that started looping again, guys. My apologies. That's better. Sorry about that, guys. Anyway, let me just wrap up by looking into the future, which I can do with my crystal ball. There are a number of eclipses coming out. In fact, another one of the talks next week that I hope you'll join in on is from Terry Cuddle from Queensland, who's going to be talking about the fact that starting next year, over a 15-year period, there are going to be 5 total solar eclipses in Australia. And that's pretty impressive, all right? It's good means I don't have to go traveling halfway around the world. Or, in fact, that last trip, that was a whole way around the world and a bit further, wasn't it? That was 50,000 kilometres. It'd be so much nice to be able to do it much closer to home, for one of them at least. So next year, as Roger mentioned in one of the questions earlier on, that there is an eclipse that goes through just the tip of Western Australia around Exmouth. However, I'm planning on going to East Timor instead for various reasons. Not just because, not so much the greatest eclipse, that's not what excites me. There's a lot of good scuba diving around here. You probably gathered that's one of my other interests. So the plan is to fly in and out through Darwin into Dili in Timor-Leste and spend a bit of time scuba diving in a couple of locations, and then hopefully do the eclipse. The weather prospects are not good, but they're not good for most of the part. But Terry's going to tell you that full story next week. So please come along for that talk. So that's my plans for April 20 next year. And then 2024, there's a lot of choices here. As you can see, this one goes right across North America, basically. Unlike the one, what was it again, 2017, the one that came through this way, which was really just the US. This one, as you can see, is Mexico and also goes all the way up into bits of Canada up here. Unfortunately, at that time of year, basically starting around the border here, the cloud starts to be 50, 60% coverage all the way up and gets worse and worse the further on you go, which means the best locations to observe it are actually in Mexico. So either Mazatlan, which is here on the coast, or there's a few towns quite close to maximum eclipse, which offer around 10%, 15% probability of cloud cover. So, you know, reasonably good. This is about maybe 18, that's like 15 or something. So that's the plan at the moment, is to fly into, probably into Mazatlan. Although there are some connections, I think, just from Dallas into the city here, which would be a possibility. But yeah, there's lots of connections to Mazatlan, even going all the way up to Canada and stuff. And afterwards, I do actually plan to head up to Canada. I haven't done this part of the world before, so this is probably my last chance to do it. Then 2027, we have the North African eclipse, although there's a little bit, as you can see, of Spain that does get to see it, and Gibraltar. My plan is to go to Morocco rather than heading over for the maximum eclipse. This will be very, very busy. This is one of that Saga cycle that has the long eclipses. They're going to be like 6.5 minutes, 7 minutes or something over here. But that will also be just absolutely packed full of people. I mean, even Morocco is probably going to be fairly busy. But I want to go to Morocco because of the food and so on. There's some lovely scenery there as well. But I'll also visit Portugal and Spain and a few other things. So, yep, that's 2027, August the 2nd. And then in 2028, July 22, we have a location that some of you will recognize anyway. That's Sydney, of course, down there. And this is my house just here. So I literally could do it from my backyard. That'll be an interesting thing to do. However, the chances are I'll probably end up heading up this way, like out towards Burke or something, just because the weather prospects will probably be better. Or even maybe Dubbo or somewhere. That time of year, it can be a bit cold and cloudy here, but at the moment, it's pretty bright and sunny in Orange, so we shall see. And then, as I said, following from 2028, there are 3 more eclipses. Was it 2030, 2037, 2038, something like that, that all occur in parts of Australia. So all of us will get a chance to see a total eclipse sometime in the next 15 years, more than likely. All right, guys, so that's the end of my talk. And I'm happy to take any questions now. Thanks, Stuart.
Thanks very much, Steve. Not too many questions, really. I think everyone was stunned by the beauty of all the photographs.
Yeah, I just see
But,
David's question pop up on my screen here. Yes, I totally agree. You probably gathered that, I have to have another reason to go there, because with like a 50-50 batting average on bad weather or good weather, it's nice to have some other reason to go to the eclipse. So now maybe that's what caused the problem. Maybe I should be picking the places that are not that have other things to do, but are middle of a desert or something like that. But you go where you can, and yes, definitely have another plan up your sleeve just in case. Oh, Stuart, I do apologise. I've turned my speakers off, haven't I? Try and get rid of that music, and that's why I can't hear you talking to me.
Okay,
Sorry,
you can.
Now I can hear you. I do apologise, mate.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah, that's better.
No, I don't. For as far as I can see, there's no further comments. Yeah, we might call an early mark, I guess.
Yeah, well, we did start a little bit early as well. So yeah.
So all I'd like to say is that on behalf of NACAA and the ASV, I'd like to thank everyone for attending NACAA 2022 for day 1. Don't forget to tune in again next Saturday on April the 23rd for session streams 5 through to 8, which will be day 2, where we'll have another day of interesting presentations. And remember, these can be all found on the NACAA website. So thanks very much again, everyone, for attending, and we'll catch up with you all again next week. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.